One of the most urgent tasks of our country is to decisively defeat the climate hysteria hoax.
We are in the beginning of a mass extinction.
The ability of CO2 to do the heavy work of creating a climate catastrophe is almost nil at this point.
The price of oil has been artificially elevated to the point of insanity.
That's not how you power a modern industrial system.
The ultimate goal of this renewable energy, plan is to reach the exact same point that we're at now.
You know who's tried that? Germany. 7 straight days of no wind for Germany. Their factories are shutting down.
They really do act like weather didn't happen prior to 1910.
Today is Friday.
That's right, Greta. It is Friday. It is the best day of the week, and not just because the weekend is almost here, because it is the day the Heartland Institute broadcasts the Climate Realism Show. My name is Jim Lakely. I'm Vice President of the Heartland Institute and the host of this program. Heartland is an organization that has been around for 40 years and is known as the leading global think tank pushing back on climate alarmism. Heartland and this show bringing the data, the science, the truth to counter the climate alarmist narrative you've been fed every single day of your life. There is nothing else quite like the Climate Realism Show streaming anywhere. So I hope you will bring friends to view this live stream every Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, and also like, share, and subscribe, and leave your comments underneath the video. These all convince YouTube's very mysterious algorithm to smile upon this program so that the show gets in front of even more people. And as a reminder, because big tech and the legacy media do not really approve of the way that we cover climate and energy on this program, Heartland's YouTube channel has been demonetized. So if you want to support the program, and I really hope you do, please visit heartland.org/TCRS. That's heartland.org/TCRS. And you can join other friends of this program who help bring the show to the world every single week. Any support you can give is warmly welcome and greatly appreciated. And before we get started, we want to thank our streaming partners, junkscience.com, CFACT, What's Up With That, the CO2 Coalition, and Heartland UK Europe. I hope you will find and follow all of these accounts on your favorite social media and video platforms, I should say. So we have a very big show today, so let's get started. We have with us today, as usual, Anthony Watts. He's Senior Fellow at the Heartland Institute and publisher of the world's most viewed website on climate change, What's Up With That. Linnea Lucan, Research Fellow for Energy Environment Policy at Heartland. And we also have producers Andy Singer and Ian behind the curtain, making sure that this show looks good and flows great. And we want to welcome back to the show two very special guests, Steve Malloy and Myron E. Bell. First time they've both been on the show together. Steve is a fellow at the Energy Environment Legal Institute. He's a board member of the Heartland Institute. He is the founder and publisher of junkscience.com. He's the author of several books on the environment, including Scare Pollution and Green Hell. And he's been on this show many times. It is always a blast. And I see you are once again, Steve, the Climate Hoax Slayer today as your title. So congratulations. That's always fun. And Myron is the chairman of the American Lands Council. You probably know him as the long-time, but now former director of the Competitive Enterprise Institute Center for Energy and Environment. By the way, both Steve and Myron served on the Trump transition team for the Environmental Protection Agency during Trump 1.0, and both have been frequent featured speakers at Heartland's 15 international conferences on climate change. I'm going to take a breath. Welcome, gents.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
All right. I guess it'll be a short breath. We have, as I mentioned, and hello, Linnea and Anthony. The audience is good to see you here as well. We do have a very big show, and we want to make sure we get it all in a pretty timely manner. But before we get started with our favorite segment, which is the crazy climate news of the week, we actually have some positive climate news of the week, and this was brought to our attention by Steve Malloy, and it's a fun segment that was featured on CNN. New polling on what the public thinks about climate change, basically climate alarmism. And so, Ian, let's go ahead and play that good news.
Americans afraid of climate change, and the answer is Americans aren't afraid of climate change. Climate activists have not successfully made the case to the American people. I want you to take a look here. greatly worried about climate change. We have data going all the way back since 1989. Look at that. It was 35%. 2000, 40%. 2020, 46%. And 2025, 40%, which is the exact same percentage as back in 2000. Despite all of these horrible weather events, the percentage of Americans who are greatly worried about climate change has stayed pretty gosh darn consistent, which kind of boggles the mind a little bit. You'll be a natural disaster victim, often or sometimes worried. Look at this. In 2006, it was 38%. Look at where we are now in 2025. It's 32%. 38% to 32%. The number's actually gone down. What about going into the future? That's all this talk. Maybe Miami might be underwater at some point, right? But yet, when it comes to climate change effect on my home area, will be harder to stay. Look at this. All adults, it's just 17%. It's just 17%. The GOP is 6%. Independents is 6%. Even Democrats here, it's just 27% of Democrats who say that climate change will make it harder to stay in our area. And I think this is what's so important. This is across the aisle in terms of the percentage who say it will be harder to stay in their area. And that is the exact same thing that we see here when you'll be a natural disaster victim. Under 50% of Democrats, Republicans, and independents believe that, in fact, they could be, or at least worry about the chance that they'd be a natural disaster victim.
now, that's right. Now, Steve, you brought this to our attention. You tweeted about it, actually. And I just love these clips from the CNN pollster. The pollster has this enormous boyish enthusiasm. And then every CNN reporter who has to get this bad news looks like he just found out his spouse cheated on him or something. So it's quite the contrast.
Look, this is an incredible tribute to the work that just a handful of people, meaning us, have been doing over the past few decades. Myron's been at it the longest. And despite, I had Grok estimate the earned media value of all the climate propaganda since 2000, when, it was at 40%, today's at 40%. And it came out to $722 billion, just as a sort of ballpark figure. And so, just a handful of us have fended off, hundreds of billions, if not $1 trillion worth of earned media propaganda, plus all the groups, the governments, UN. I mean, it's just incredible that, the public doesn't really care about this. I mean, those 40%, they are probably hardcore leftists and have no choice but to believe, what they've been taught. But the 60% that have a mind, they're just not convinced.
Myron, what do you think when you hear poll results like this? As Steve mentioned, I mean, combined, the two of you probably have something like 60 or 70 decades of experience fighting back on climate alarmism. No offense, Myron.
No, I wasn't in at the beginning, but CEI was. Fred Smith went to Rio in '92, and he was one of 3 free market opponents of the Rio Framework Convention on Climate Change. I think this is a great tribute to a small band of people, but I think also reality has a lot to do with it. The Americans who don't buy climate hysteria are the ones who actually have to deal with the weather. People who work outside, the people who sit in front of screens all day, like me and most of you, are much more susceptible to the propaganda that comes from the mainstream media and from the left. So I think we can, the Trump victory depended upon the working class moving to the Republicans. But I think you can see that in this debate, our strength is not with the semi-educated intelligentsia. It's with working class Americans who deal with the weather every day and know that, a little warm weather isn't that bad, but cold weather is very, it's difficult to deal with.
Yeah, I take exception to that, Myron. I'm not the one that sits in front of screens all day. I'll do it. You spend a lot of time. I actually,
most of us, Anthony.
Unlike any climate scientist in the world, I go out and visit and categorize these faulty weather stations all over the place. So there.
Right. Absolutely. I said most of us.
Yeah, that's me, unfortunately. As maddening as it is.
All right. Well, that's good. So like I said, we have a ton of show. I just wanted to get that out there because it is good news. I mean, Steve's been on the show often, and he says one day we're going to have to change the title of this show because everyone's going to agree with us, or the truth will out at some point. But no, I have a feeling.
I know, the Climate Consensus Show.
Yeah. Well, let's not forget. I mean, didn't Al Gore personally attack climate realism?
He did. He did.
Where's that clip?
That clip is for next week. I've been working on that one. I got it. I got it yesterday. It's a tribute to what the message we're getting out there and the way we do it. Both the Heartland Institute, Steve Malloy's organizations, Myron's organizations, and so many other, as he said, a small handful of organizations and allies that have done this. That Al Gore at a TED Talk was forced to address climate realism by name and climate realists by name.
Yeah.
That's called winning. And we're going to be talking about that probably next week. All right. But for all the great stuff we need to talk about today, let's get rolling with the crazy climate news of the week. Hit it, Andy. Yes, thank you very much, Bill Nye, and we'll be back to you very soon. Sit tight. But we're going to start off by analyzing what is in the climate and energy realm in Donald Trump's one big, beautiful bill. The nonprofit law firm Earth Justice calls it, quote, the worst environmental bill in U.S. history. So it's got to be great. There's some highlights here. I'm going to put something on the screen in a minute here, Ian, from the slideshow. But doing our own research here, the big, beautiful bill resumes coal leasing on federal lands. On the residential solar, that 30% tax credit is going to go away at the end of the year. On wind and solar energy projects, the tax credits are eliminated, with the exception that projects started within the next 11 months, or those completed by the end of 2027, are grandfathered in. The $7,500 per unit federal tax credit on the purchase of new EVs, gone as of September 30th, 2025. And plus the $4,000 federal incentive for buying a used EV. Those are great. Used EVs. That's also been killed off. So perhaps this dream of electrifying the entire federal fleet is also out the window. There was a tax credit for installing an EV charger at your home. That's also been killed off, effective June of 2026. And there's also a rescission of funds for green and resilient retrofit program for multifamily housing. If you can bring up that slide, Ian, I found this via X. This is from the bill itself. Here's some of the other great news from the one big, beautiful bill. There's a rescission of funding for clean, heavy-duty vehicles, a repeal of the greenhouse gas reduction fund, a rescission of funding for diesel emissions reductions, a rescission of funding for Section 2011-0 of the Clean Air Act, no more funding for methane emissions and waste reduction incentive programs at petroleum and natural gas systems. The funding for environmental climate justice block grants, that's gone. Neighborhood access and equity grant program, also gone. And the funding for low carbon materials in federal buildings has also been rescinded. So, guys, I wanted to start with the reason I wanted Myron and Steve on this call is that we both talked about this a little bit. Myron is both of these guys have decades of experience in Washington, D.C. They know how environmental policy is made, both in the regulatory, the administrative state, but also in legislation. Myron is a glass half full kind of guy. He thought that this was pretty good. Myron and Steve, is a little bit more of a glass half empty kind of guy. And so I wanted these two to kind of lay their positions out, and maybe we can come to a happy medium on what we should think about this. I'll start with you, Myron.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. I'm more than a glass half full. The Inflation Reduction Act in 2022 gave subsidies for every kind of commercially unviable energy, including carbon capture and storage, for example. These subsidies, most of them were perpetual. They would never end. So what the one big beautiful bill, the reconciliation bill, did was it repealed not all of them, but most of them. Now, we all wanted everything to go. They should all be swept away and put in the dustbin. But given the way Republicans usually do these things, this is a monumental victory, because the way Republicans handle reconciliation bills, or big bills, must-pass bills, The way Republicans typically handle must-pass bills is that everybody tries to sneak their special handout or favor into the bill. Very little of that happened in this bill, right across the board, not just the energy and climate stuff. So this bill gets rid of the wind and solar subsidy in a few years. It gets rid of the EV subsidy immediately. It gets rid of the penalty for automakers that don't meet the CAFE standards, the corporate average fuel economy standards. It reduces the penalties to zero. So effectively, the automakers can now build the kinds of cars and sell the kinds of cars that Americans want to buy and not be confined by what the federal government says they have to do. So on the auto side, it's terrific. And on the electric grid side, it's really good. So I think this is a tremendous victory. And it shows that the Republicans actually stood up and did something with Trump pushing them. And they didn't cave into all the special interests, except big oil. Big oil got the carbon capture and storage credit keeps going. So I think that was actually the worst part of the bill.
Steve?
Yeah, so look, I agree with Myron. I mean, I'm not looking at this as a glass half empty type situation. This is really unprecedented. I was for this bill when the House had only knocked out, half of the Green New Scam subsidies, so the Senate added some of them back. And the way the president got the Freedom Caucus to go along with this is he promised them that he was going to take administrative action to cut back the Green New Scam spending. So he did that by issuing an executive order on Monday. And I think there's going to be more executive orders. And so, the president has committed to taking administrative action on the basis of national security and making sure that, wind and solar are not advantaged over fossil fuels. And I think there's a lot more coming up that will really give teeth to the rollbacks in the bill and add even more. So I think this was great. I'm very happy about this. I was all for the bill. I mean, the tax cuts were really the most important part of this. Everything else is gravy, but that gravy has been great. And there's a lot more to come because the president is going to use his administrative powers. And, I know libertarians worry about an overweening executive, but, the last administration really abused its power, and we've got to roll it back. And Congress doesn't always have the courage to do everything. It's not always possible to get things done on the Hill. So, we're headed in the right direction. No question about it.
Yeah, and there's some stuff that is like kind of boring oil field stuff that a lot of people don't talk about that are in this bill as well that are quite good. I was breaking down, section by section of Title V of the bill, and especially in the oil and gas leasing section. And there's some good, like, kind of funny, sneaky stuff in there. They entirely repealed a crazy part of the Inflation Reduction Act where the government wanted to take royalties on gas that's lost by flaring or venting and like accidental releases and stuff. So the government wanted companies to pay them for gas that the companies weren't even making any money off of. And they also made it very that the Secretary of the Interior has to follow the law with regard to lease sales. No more slow walking. They set royalty rates maxed out for offshore at maxed out instead of minimumed at 16 2/3%, which is a lot, but still better than having just like a minimum with no cap. So yeah, there's a lot of really good stuff. A lot of the targets in the oil and gas leasing section are talking about how the government just cannot be slow walking. They have to do leases and drilling permits and the like with a reasonable speed. The term that they use is in a timely manner. So it's all good. It's a lot of trying to prevent what happened during the Biden administration where department, the interior and stuff were just like, yeah, we'll do lease sales eventually. Someday, maybe not, who knows. So yeah, no, it's looking pretty good. There's a lot of, like I said, it's a lot of like boring stuff, and reading it gave me a headache because it's a lot of legalese, but there's a lot of neat stuff in there.
Legalese is allowed to give you a headache, Linnea. It should not be giving headaches to a certain member of the Supreme Court. Anthony,
Yeah.
do you have any thoughts on this? Anthony's not really.
I'm just, other than I think overall it's a big win for us. I don't really have much to say about it because, politics and policy is not my forte. It's the science and the data and so forth. But I think this is a move forward that's really good for everybody. And I'm looking forward to seeing these changes. I'm looking forward to seeing a lot of the climate alarmism get unfunded permanently, hopefully, and for us to have a much more reasonable and sensible outlook on the future.
We can all agree with that. Yeah. And hopefully that will happen. And this is just the start. Sometimes it's easy to forget that Trump has been president for months, not years, and a lot has already been accomplished. All right, we're going to move on to our second crazy climate news of the week, for which I have, I think, a pretty fun drop.
What is that? What is that? What is it? Oh, no, not the bees! Not the bees! Ah!
Yes, it's the bees. Another bee story. I don't understand why climate alarmism is so obsessed with bees, but take that for what you will, and I couldn't resist that little drop. This story comes to us from the Daily Mail. Bees are losing their buzz. Warmer weather reduces frequency and pitch of wing vibrations, researchers warn. So now you can add another thing to the list of things global warming makes worse, I guess. I'll read a little bit from the story. There's nothing quite like the gentle buzz of a bumblebee to let you know that summer is approaching, but the distinct hum could soon become a rarity as climate change is reducing the frequency and pitch of wing vibrations, according to scientists. Experts warned this could have consequences for the effectiveness of bee communication and their role as pollinators, and it could be bad news for the nation's tomatoes, blueberries, and honeysuckle plants. A team from Uppsala University in Sweden analyzed colonies of buff-tailed bumblebees, one of the most numerous bumblebee species in Europe and the United Kingdom. They used accelerometers to measure the frequency and audible pitch of the bees' buzz, specifically focusing on sounds their muscles contracting. Focusing on sounds they make when they are not flying. And analysis showed that the bees were affected by both increased temperatures and exposure to heavy metals, with their muscles contracting less during the buzzing. This led to fewer wing vibrations, suggesting that the buzz might not be quite so loud. Now, the reason this is a problem, they explain, that if warmer temperatures make it so that the bees don't buzz so much, that means they're shaking on the plant and not spreading as much pollen as they normally would, and that's a big problem, I guess. So anyway, Linnea, we could just leave it there. There sure is a lot of hood and may and perhaps in this story, and we seem to get a lot of stories with those qualifiers in them when it comes to climate alarmism. But you've done a lot of work for our Climate Realism page and on videos about bees, so I'm going to let you start off.
I talk about bees way more than I ever thought I would talk about bees. Not just posting the script to bee movie in unsuspecting chats, but yeah, it's very stupid, and it actually goes back to the climate funding issue, right? So a lot of these stories that focus on some kind of like an ecological, like a very niche, very specific ecological area, and tying it to climate change has to do with the fact that you get funding. It's easier to get funding if you can shift your bee noise making study like a climate angle, right? So you might want to do a study on bee communication or whatever. Well, you want to do that research, but nobody cares. So you're not getting your study funded. So instead you say, well, what if climate change is changing bee communication? Then you can get your study funded. That's what I suspect goes on here. So yeah, I'm very cynical about all of these types of studies. And I'm very cynical about why these kinds of studies make the news anyway. I think it's once again just because news organizations need to push a certain amount of climate stuff for certain funders. And so they'll just take basically whatever they can find. They probably do like a research paper, control F search and try to find anything that mentions climate change and run an article based on that. So yeah, there's not a lot to say about this. Maybe bees' wings do make different noise depending on temperature and humidity in the air. That wouldn't surprise me. Does it really matter? 1 degree, 1.5 degrees over the course of a century of global average temperature change, I would be very, very surprised.
Anthony?
Yeah, I did a deep dive into this study. I went in and looked at scientific literature about this and so forth. And basically, what I discovered is that there's a Latin name for this phenomenon, and it's called Crappus maximus.
Thank you very much, Anthony.
Yeah, if I could just throw in my 2 cents here. So I've been following the alleged bee apocalypse for decades now, and sometimes there's more bees, sometimes there's fewer bees. It seems to me the biggest threat to bees is modern beekeeping. They take these giant hives from farm to farm for pollination purposes, and they're not always all that hygienic, and the bees become sick and they spread disease, and that's not good for the bees. For there to be an actual environmental problem, there's got to be some actual problem that's observable someplace. Although the bee apocalypse has been going on for decades, I mean, we are producing more food than ever, more fruit, vegetables, grains than ever. So where's the problem? I think the problem is if there is a problem with bees, it's in the hygiene of the beekeepers.
Yep. All right. Let's move on to our third item in our crazy climate news of the week. And this is Nye Lies about floods. We saw this video before. Bill Nye was on CNN, and our friend Jason, hold on just 1 second. Yeah, and our friend Jason Isaac had a nice tweet about this. He says that, remember when Bill Nye just taught kids about science? Now he's cashing in on fear, and his investments depend on the climate panic. Very good point. Very good point, Jason Isaac. So here's his appearance on CNN. He has quite a few lies and misstatements about the Texas flooding, and let's play that and start debunking it.
Bill Nye, the science guy. Thanks for being here.
It's good to be here. I'm sorry. I really am sorry for all the trouble.
It's terrible. And so just that last part of what we were describing, you keep hearing once in a lifetime, once in 100 years, once in 1,000 years. At this point, it's not anymore. It's just where we are with the climate and the environment.
Oh, that's, as we like to say, our side of it, the science side of it. This is exactly what was predicted. It's very difficult to tie any one weather event to climate change. However, the warm weather events are actually easier to tie to climate change. And so the other problem that happened in the hill country in Texas is this business of the Balcony escarpment, where the air mass got lifted. So it spread out and the rain came down even faster. But it'll happen again, to your point. And everybody's talked about this for years. And the technologies for warning systems exist. Where people have tidal or tsunami events, these sort of warning systems can be put up. So what are we going to do about it is the ancient question, and it would be to stop burning fossil fuels. When you're in a hole, stop digging, and so on. But the fossil fuel industry has been very successful in getting organizations like the U.S. Congress to think that it's really not happening.
Yeah. Well, Anthony, I know that, and I'm scrambling here on the background, I know that we're going to address this, but, just listening to that from Bill Nye, that's a lot. There was a lot of false statements in barely just a 90-second clip. And I know that you have some charts here to maybe tell a little bit more truth about what's happening. What happened?
Well, we'll do that when we get to the man segment. But what I do want to do is say, I put up a tweet just a little while ago talking about this, and I'd said that in the last week, the Texas flash flood tragedies brought out more armchair climatologists like Bill Nye than I've ever seen before for a single weather event. And, they're talking about cloud seeding perhaps enhancing this. No, cloud seeding is a very short-term thing. They did it 2 days ahead of time. It usually dissipates in 30 minutes or less. And the effect, when it's measured, increasing rainfall might be 5 to 10%, not a whole lot. Certainly not anything like what we saw with that extended mesocyclone that stayed over Texas. But, this is not new. The Camp Mystic tragedy is so that area is so prone to flash flooding. It's been called Flash Flood Alley. AccuWeather had a story about it. And large-scale flash floods have occurred 4 times in the area during the last 50 years. And in 1987, Kerrville had an even higher crest of 37.4 feet and 10 campers were killed. So this is not unprecedented, and it's not climate change. It's happened in the past. It just happens to be the way the area is. And what may have happened here is because a lot of these warnings went out in the wee hours of the morning, like 4:30 a.m. They may not have heard them or gotten them, or if they did, they may have simply ignored them because of a phenomenon known as warning fatigue. I mean, in any given summer in Texas, there might be a couple thousand warnings issued by the National Weather Service statewide. And so people kind of just get used to them, and maybe they don't pay as much attention to them as they should. Ironically, the thing that could have saved this, Bill and I did say one accurate thing. There are warning systems that could have prevented this. And in 2016, Fair County considered installing flood warning sirens. The county ultimately didn't pursue them because of oppositions from residents, and you can look that up. It's really sad, but that's the bottom line.
Yeah, Steve. Before we leave this topic, I wanted to point out 2 other parts of this interview that were pretty stupid, but I didn't want to include it in the clip. In one part of the interview with CNN, Nye talked about Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, showing that science is in the Constitution. Hey, Mr. Engineer, that's about patents and copyrights. That is not about promoting alarmist science in the Constitution. Good grief. And he was also asked by CNN's Dana Bash about lobbying Congress, and he immediately corrected her. Said, no, we don't lobby. That's a legal term. That's difficult. He's just an advocate, which I think is pretty rich, since he accuses the Heartland Institute of being lobbyists for the fossil fuel industry or whatever, and attacking our side of this argument all the time. And he's very, very quick to say that he's not a lobbyist. He's just an advocate.
Yeah. He's just really a despicable person. What really sticks in my mind from him is he said that climate denialism, which I guess he means us, will die like one old white guy at a time. And it's, that kind of comment, it says everything you need to know about him.
He's also a dimwit. And I think that helps us. He's
well, there's that too. Yeah.
He's really slow.
Well, he's definitely slowing down. He's not the cool nerd anymore. He's just somebody's kind of grumpy grandpa at this point. But just we'll move on. But just taking it from the top of the segment there, Jason Isaac pointing out that he's got lots of investments. I guess presumably, at least Jason Isaac is accusing this, not me, not the Climate Realism Show. That his investments, as a lot of these people do, they have investments in green energy. So they got bad news with the One Big Beautiful Bill this week.
Well, let's also throw in that you can't even build green energy without fossil fuels. I mean, all the stuff is made in China with coal power. It's all built with construction equipment powered by diesel. All the foundations need concrete, also made of fossil fuels, and rebar. Just to say what he said, that we should just stop using fossil fuels, it's just moronic.
Yeah, I mean, not using fossil fuels or moving faster to net zero is not going to affect the frequency of flooding in Texas at all, or anywhere else for that matter. But we're going to get to that moving forward here pretty quick. All right, let's do a couple of fun things. We'll add this to the stage. This is our meme of the week. I couldn't resist this one. This just says breaking news. This is from our friends at Wide Awake Media. Breaking news: the entire country of Germany has been submerged with molten lava as a result of normal summer temperatures. And the most fun part about this this post on X was how it got community noted, which said that that's actually not lava. That's actually Germany's not covered in lava. So yeah, no kidding. Yeah, we figured it out. It's called a joke, and it's a joke because of this meme that we have shown on this program in the past. Whereas a weather forecast in Germany from 2017 has higher temperatures than in 2022, but the map is all red and yellow and orange, and it's all just part of the propaganda.
Yeah, it's just bizarre. I watch a lot of TV weather, because I spent years doing it, and it is just criminal the way that they are making these maps lie with color. They're making it worse than it ever was, and it's very obvious what they're doing there, and it's just not true. And yet, but you're not surprised when you look at what television news covers these days and how they cover it. It's not surprising at all, because the quality of journalism has literally gone down the toilet in the last 20 years.
Yep, for sure. All right, well, let's get on to our main topic for this week, and that is the tragic Texas flash floods. Obviously, this is the biggest news story of the week as it relates to weather, and the legacy media, not just Bill Nye and other alarmists, are trying to say that these floods are our fault. It's human-caused climate change that has made this disaster happen. But it is a disaster, but it is a natural disaster, as we will discuss. As of this morning, when I last looked it up, more than 120 people have confirmed dead, including 36 children, most at Camp Mystic, a Christian summer camp. Another 172 people are missing. This is just so tragic. It's heartbreaking. Our prayers go out to the families and friends of those affected by these flash floods, especially those lost, and God be with you all. But we must get into, as we do on this program, nobody else does, and that's breaking through the alarmist media narrative on this tragedy. Frankly, they're exploiting it, and it's pretty disgusting, and we're going to bring you the truth. So a few of the myths about the floods are, and I'll just lay out a few of these and we'll throw it to the panel, that this is, quote, a 1 in 1,000 year flood, or that this kind of flooding is completely unprecedented, that human-caused global warming has and will make such tragedies more frequent and more deadly, that there was no warning system in place. So why weren't people warned? And then another point that's been making the rounds is that Trump's budget cuts made it so that NOAA and the National Weather Service dropped the ball on this. Now, I know this is a lot to unpack, but Anthony, maybe we should start with you talking about the Texas flooding with some charts, and we can go through them on the screen.
Yeah, as I said earlier, I put out a tweet about this. You can see it there at What's Up With That on Twitter, or X as we call it now. You might check it out. But the bottom line is that this is not unique. It's unique in that a lot of people died, but in terms of weather or climate, it's not unique at all. And so the point is that these things have happened before in the same area, exactly the same area. And that particular river is highly prone to flash flooding because of its geography and proximity to all the moisture coming in from the Gulf. You get frontal systems that come down through Texas, cold fronts, impacting that warm air from the Gulf, and you can get these massive storms. And in this case, we had a storm that lingered for quite a long time. It was the remnants of a tropical storm system. It got caught up in an upper level trough, and it just all kinds of factors meteorologically that made it just stay there. And this has happened before. So that's the problem with a lot of climate alarmists. They don't go back and look at history. They don't see, anything in the past as being relevant to the present, because in the present, climate change is the only factor they think about. And so they ignored all that other stuff. But let's look at some of the charts that we've got. Let's bring up one of them and let's see what we've got here. That's not it. There it is. Coming. Anyway, this is live television, folks. Anything can happen. There it is. Now, they talk about climate change exacerbating, the heat waves, which then exacerbates the storms. Well, the heat waves were the worst in the United States way back in the 30s. The summer of 1936, for example, was truly record breaking and has not been repeated since. Way back when carbon dioxide was just, almost half of what it is today. Not quite half, but much, much lower. So how did that happen? Natural variation. A combination of natural variation events caused high pressure ridges to basically just sit over much of the United States during the summer and create these tremendous heat domes. Of course, if you listen to people like Bill Nye or Michael Mann or whoever, they will tell you that, well, heat domes are getting worse. They're new. They're worser, from climate change. Well, that's not true at all. Again, they don't go back and look at the history. And so that's the key here. The temperatures over the last 100 years have not increased dramatically. This is from Chris Marks. He put together this wonderful chart here, and it shows you the number of days above 95 degrees, the number of days above 100 degrees, and the number of days above 105. We have not seen big upticks in the temperature in the worst case heat days. So it's just not there. The signal of climate change is just not there in the high temperatures. And so all of these, this posturing and speculation that's been going on social media, I'll go back to the Latin definition. It's crappus maximus.
Yeah, well, Steve and Myron, maybe you can weigh in on here. I wanted to bring up some other information here. Found this. This is from EPA. Actually, can we make that? We'll go to the side view here. Maybe make it a little bigger. There we go. So this is from EPA's own website. This is climate change indicators, river flooding. And if you can see this on the screen, reddish or orange color means decrease in river flooding, and blue and darker blue means an increase in river flooding. And I'm going to zoom in here. This is Texas. Almost all of Texas has seen a decrease in river flooding. And what was the time period here? From 1965 to 2015. So that's quite the long time. And then this is another chart that we got from, I believe, our friend Chris Martz had it on his X account. This is the Guadalupe River, the river that flooded and flooded Camp Mystic. This is a chart that shows the discharge of cubic feet per second from October 1941 to July of 2025. And the trend over the last several, or at least a decade or more, has been downward on that. Steve Malloy, you do not see any curiosity among our mainstream media to look up, let alone present facts like this.
Yeah, so there's no there. What a surprise. When I woke up, I think it was July 5th, the next day, and read the Washington Post report, I thought, wow, this is really different, because the Washington Post coverage was basically, it's a copy of its front page from July, 1987, the last time the Guadalupe River flooded and killed people. And, it happened this year, it happened then, it happened a long time before that. So clearly it's got nothing to do with climate change. So, and I thought that this was going to be sort of a market difference in, extreme weather event coverage going forward. But then, I went to the New York Times and I saw that their climate reporter Raymond Zhang had some nonsense about, some study finding that there had been more extreme precipitation events this century. That's easy to debunk. And then it just sort of took off from there. So I've been quite disappointed to see the media fall back in their old practice of just trying to make every extreme weather event, every natural disaster, every tragedy about climate change, when it's got nothing to do with any of that. It's just a tragedy.
Yeah, well, this flood has caused more death and destruction because there are more people living there. People want to live in areas that have all kinds of natural amenities, but a lot of these places are prone to floods. It's a smaller example of the hurricane phenomenon. Hurricanes do a lot more damage now than they used to, because instead of 2 million people living in Florida, 20 million people live in Florida. Ditto Texas. So, there used to be shacks on the beaches in Florida. Now there's multi-million-dollar homes just, for as far as you can see. So the floods in Texas have been going on for a long time, but this one is particularly devastating because a lot more people are living there now.
Yeah, people like to live near water. It's just that simple, and that's increased dramatically over the past 50 to 100 years.
And warmer. People like to live where it's warmer. So people are
That's
moving
true.
to
Look
Texas
at
and
Florida.
Yeah, yeah.
Florida was going to be wiped off the map by sea level rise, and yet, its population continues to grow every year. It's the fastest growing state in the nation, not only because it's warmer, but because things are sensible and reasonable down there, right?
We hope that will continue.
Well, and I think we'd also be remiss if we didn't talk about weather attribution. The folks at World Weather Attribution, Freddie Otto. There was a Climate Central program featuring them and how they're attributing this to climate change. And those people know so much about climate science and they're so good at it that they failed to predict this event. And that's kind of the point. I mean, what they do has got nothing to do with science. If you understand something scientifically, you can use that knowledge to predict the future. They never do that. They go back in the past and just make up stuff about past events and try to link it to climate. And it's totally bogus.
Yeah, I want to bring up this particular chart. This came in from our friends at the CO2 Coalition, and it really kind of says everything you need to know. And if we can bring it up full screen so people can read it, I'd be appreciative of it, because you can't really see it there clearly. There we go. That's a little bit better. What we want to show with this chart is the fact that the annual reported number of flash floods in Texas has actually gone down over the past 30 years. And if you look at the amount of CO2 that's been added to the atmosphere, it's going up. And so obviously there's no correlation between these two things. But if you listen to the climate alarmists, they would say that there's absolutely a correlation, that it's making flash floods worse, thunderstorms worse, tornadoes worse, hurricanes worse. But when you go and look at the hard data behind it, like we did here, it's just not there. It's a figment of their imagination.
Yeah, I would just be appreciative if they would note that that flash floods in Texas have declined. They won't even say that. They keep lying that these things keep getting worse and worse. Bill Nye lying on CNN saying that these things are getting worse and worse, specifically in Texas. The data doesn't show it. That's why this show will never, will never have to go away, because we have too many people in our media and our cultural and political betters who simply are ignorant of the truth or are lying and refuse to say the truth because it doesn't serve their agenda.
Yeah. And just to tie this into the beginning in that clip from CNN viewers are not believing this stuff either.
True.
Are there any CNN viewers? I didn't know that, Steve.
Yeah, and I wanted to bring up too, normally we save Q&A for the end, but I do want to address a couple of questions that just came up here. Chris Nisbet says, just how large is the area where that camp was, and how far would they have to move to put it in a safe zone? Well, the thing with Texas is fairly infamous for having very, very loose zoning. Like you can pretty much plant your camp where you want it to go. People want to be as close to the river as they can, or to where ephemeral water shows up as they can for a pretty, wilderness retreat. If you look, there have been, I don't have it right in front of me, but people have been posting the like flood zone designations, and Camp Mystic was basically all in the red, like this is a known frequent flood zone area. It was not very far away from them at all that they had, a little they were kind of in like a little gully. So if they just went uphill, it would have been better. I don't know if the yellow zone, which is the flood risk, but not necessarily flood zone area, was also part of the stuff that got washed out. But people like to put homes, they like to put structures in areas near water. They like to be enclosed in pretty gullies. You saw this last year with Asheville. People love that like cliffside in a gully aesthetic, I guess. But that cliff, as engineer guy here points out, that topography is there for a reason. That topography was built by water over time. It was made that way because it is prone to flash floods. It's how the region carves out those amazing gullies and beautiful. I mean, they're called washes for a reason, right? So you put a camp in a wash, and a storm comes at 4 a.m. It's a major. It's just asking for trouble. And I'm very skeptical. I think you're going to see some really interesting and terrible lawsuits going through. I am extremely skeptical that Camp Mystic did not experience flooding in the past, based on the satellite photography of the topography that they were looking at. It's appalling.
Well, they did suffer a similar flooding in the 80s. I think it was 1987. I mean, so this has been known, and maybe the camp wasn't as big as it was in 1987 as it is today, but that is the case. And I wanted to add something else here to the screen. This is from Chris Martz, our friend of the program from CFACT. He mentions, because this is another one of those lies going out there about what happened here, was that there wasn't sufficient flood watch or flood warning issued. And it says here that 15 hours in advance, they urged residents to be weather aware. At 1:14 a.m., they issued a flash flood warning more than 3 hours before it crested at 29 feet. And he shows here the actual bulletin from the National Weather Service warning about the flash flood. Now, it happened in the middle of the night, or early in the morning when people are asleep. But that's just the nature of severe weather. It can pop up, as Anthony knows, at absolutely any time. And then just one other point, I won't bring it up on the screen, but you can look it up yourself. There's a story in the Wall Street Journal that says escalating alerts of dangerous flooding arrived when people were sleeping. And in that story, there is the debunking of the idea that Trump's budget cuts to the National Weather Service and to NOAA had any effect on this thing. The National Weather Service Employees Organization, which is the union representing the National Weather Service, said vacancies did not affect the forecast office ability to issue warnings for the floods. Again, you have to get this kind of information from this program, because it seems our media seems incapable of sharing that information with the public in a timely way.
Yeah, and I would like to repeat what I said earlier. There's a phenomenon known as warning fatigue that goes on, particularly in the Midwest during any summer. The National Weather Service, in an overabundance of caution, issues so many watches and warnings that they become almost a drone in the background of your life experience there. Mike Smith, who has addressed this issue regularly, has said that we need to have a blue ribbon panel basically to assess how we are putting warnings out in the United States and how to get people to listen to them. So in this case, it was probably a deadly combination of people were sleeping, the fact that there were no sirens, which could have woken them up. They had an opportunity to put sirens in Curry County in 2016, and then the populace said, no, we don't want that. It's going to be annoying. And then again, that's a symptom of warning fatigue. And then, they just simply didn't get the message, or if they did get the message, they ignored it. And it's truly tragic. But climate change has no factor in this whatsoever. Budget cuts have no factor in this whatsoever. Trump has no factor in this whatsoever.
Well stated. All right. Well, we're already at the 53-minute mark. Already packed it in with a lot of information, and we have a lot of questions already from our audience. So, Linnea, take it away.
Sure thing. So we have a whole bunch of questions. It's great stuff. Okay, there's something going on with the formatting here. Okay, I'll be cut in half. That's all right.
There you go.
There we go. Thank you. So our first question comes from our friend Stan, and he says, Myron, why are you trying to bother the left with reality?
Thanks, Stan. The fantastical constructs of the left are not limited to climate. We find that they want to create an alternate reality in the economy, in world affairs, in the way in human nature. They want to deny human nature. And so I think, generally on our side, we're outgunned and we're outspent. But on most of these issues, reality is on our side. And as wise men in the past have pointed out, reality has a way of intruding, and even the people who live in fantasy worlds, like the climate hysterics, have a hard time dealing with reality. And I think one of the great things about this show is that you point out the facts. You show where the claims are fantastical, and reality debunks the kind of the world that these people have created. Something's going on.
I think we lost
Linnea's dropped off. Okay. So maybe our producer can put up the next question and we can just jump on it. Jim, you're muted. Whatever happened?
I was speaking the whole time with the thing muted. Sorry, I got it under control until Linnea gets back. So I'll take the questions here. Hold on, I'll go back to the one here. So whatever happened to colony collapse disorder? Speaking of the bee colonies, that is.
Yeah, well, that went the way of the dodo when they discovered that it was basically due to varroa mites. And once they started looking at that in a broader context, the whole climate change is causing colony collapse disorder started to disappear from the rhetoric.
Yeah, could I add to that? One thing that it strikes me about this debate about bees is that honeybees are not native to North America. They were introduced by European colonists. And so they are actually an invasive species. And I'm not quite sure why we were supposed to be concerned about them. I thought we were supposed to be controlling and getting rid of invasive species. So,
Yeah, that's a good point. And I brought it up in the comments as well. I'm sorry that I disappeared there for a second, guys. My computer just suddenly decided to disconnect all of my USB ports. So that was cool. Which meant my camera and my mic, everything went down. The interesting thing is, they've got some areas in Europe in particular that have so many darn honeybees because of hobbyist, what's the word? Apiary. Anyway, hobbyist beekeepers, that their native pollinators are actually being destroyed, like devastated by them, because they just cannot compete with these voracious little honeybees. And also the honeybees are actually starving in some places because there's not enough flowering plants for them. It's pretty astonishing that weird little blip of propaganda about bees was basically focused on the colony collapse disorder issue that basically only exists in farmed bees, like what we were talking about at the top of the show, or at the beginning of the show, with regards to like poor hygiene in beekeeping facilities. It's not observed in like nature, so it's an effect of beekeeping. It's not an effect of any like environmental conditions. All right. Let's go this one from Christine Laurel, who says, as Steve pointed out, the fact that you need fossil fuels to manufacture wind and solar is conveniently overlooked. What is their plan if they succeed in ending fossil fuels, Steve? Magic?
Well, they don't have a plan. They don't plan to end fossil fuel use. That would be impossible. That would be suicidal. The whole point of the climate hoax is it's the left's scheme to grab political power and control the economy. It's got, read Animal Farm. They even have a windmill in it. And in there, the evil pigs just tell lie after lie after lie until, their power is irrevocable. And that's Orwell nailed modern environmentalism, modern leftism in Animal Farm, and that's what's been happening to us.
Anybody else? Myron? Nope,
No.
Nothing to add there. Yeah, I think Steve has got it pretty much. All right. So Chris Nisbet wants to know, with regards to the bill, why wouldn't wind and solar subsidies stop immediately?
Because there were several senators who wouldn't vote for it unless there was a slight extension. So the Senate went along with getting rid of EV subsidies immediately, but there were several Republican senators who said, well, my wind and solar donors tell me that they just can't. They need a little more. They need a few more subsidies. And so, the bill passed with 50 votes plus Vice President Vance. So I would say this about two people who voted against the One Big Beautiful Bill. Rand Paul, he's a very principled man, but the fact that you can't get him to vote for it, he just wouldn't vote for it because it's fiscally irresponsible to spend any more money when we're so far in debt. Because he was a no vote, Leader Thune had to negotiate more with the squishy Republicans who wanted to continue some of these handouts. So Rand Paul didn't get anything, and so the leader had to round up the squishes to get to 50. So, and the same thing in the House with Thomas Massie. The House Freedom Caucus was very effective, but Thomas Massie didn't get anything because he announced that he'll never vote for this and just forget about it. So he had no leverage, and so the people on the left in the Republican Party had the leverage. So I think we need to congratulate both Speaker Johnson and Leader Thune, the House Freedom Caucus, and particularly President Trump and his White House team. I mean, they really pushed this over and convinced the 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 no votes to switch and to get it through.
Absolutely. And this is actually a good follow-up question that just popped up here from Energy Colonizer, who says, for Myron, do you think HR 4218 to amend the Clean Air Act to facilitate state implementation of national ambient air quality standards is going to pass?
My guess is no. Steve or Jim may know more about it, but it's hard to pass these bills. That's why they have to use reconciliation, because it only takes 51 votes in the Senate.
Yeah, it's almost impossible to do anything with the Clean Air Act. President Trump's going to have to do everything administratively, and then we've got to hope that there's another Republican administration that can, keep deregulating and detoxifying the Clean Air Act.
Yeah.
Yep. Awesome. Okay. I'm trying to find more. Here we go. From Climate Bell. Are there people in the new DC administration that would appreciate a scientific proof that vindicates their climate direction? And if so, who?
The endangerment the reconsideration of the endangerment finding, which President Trump essentially ordered the EPA Administrator Zeldin to undertake, that reconsideration has been sent to OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, and the underlying regulatory part of that, OIRA, which Jeff Clark runs. And the technical support document with some science in it has also been sent to OMB. So that reconsideration is going to come out as a proposed rule, and it will be published in the Federal Register, and there will be a comment period. And I have been told by several people who have been working on this in the administration that they want people to fill up the comment period with good science. They want the sort of skinny scientific case that they've made for withdrawing the endangerment finding. They want people to add to that, to strengthen it, to enlarge it. So I think there will be a huge opportunity to actually get on the record a lot more good science. Now, of course, the other side will be piling on with all the crap that Anthony has alluded to. So I think there's going to be an official a window here to get a lot of the science that disputes the climate hoax into the record, and they will have to consider it.
Thank you very much, Myron. Alrighty, I'm going to bounce over to a science question real quick here. This is an interesting one I'm going to pitch to Anthony because I think I know what they're talking about, but I'm not entirely sure. LT Oracle of Truth says, I saw film from the ISS of a reverse blue sprite in northern Mexico a day before the flooding. From what I have learned, blue sprites are known to appear during unusual weather and flooding. Thoughts?
Well, sprites, which by the way used to be considered so odd that airline pilots, which had seen them, since they started doing jet aircraft way back in the 50s, refused to report them because they consider them like, nobody's going to believe us when we talk about this stuff. But sprites have been around for a long time, and they are associated with powerful thunderstorms. And you can think of it like this. A thunderstorm has a big difference between positive and negative charge from top to bottom, and that's why lightning occurs, right? But it's also the same concept as a linear accelerator used in atomic particle research. You have this huge difference between positive and negative, and so the particles want to go zoom, electrons want to go zoom upwards. And so what we end up with is basically a vertically stacked linear accelerator, and when all of these electrons shoot up through the atmosphere, they ionize the air and turn it all kinds of different colors depending on what's happening. And so, yes, it happens during severe thunderstorms. And of course, some flooding may occur during those severe thunderstorms. It's not unusual. And no, it's not driven by climate change.
Thank you. And Anthony, just my follow-up question, is it the same kind of thing for like ball lightning and weird phenomena like that?
There's no solid evidence that ball lightning exists.
Oh,
I've
interesting.
looked into this for years. I have not seen any credible evidence. We've seen a lot of AI generated stuff recently about ball lightning, but there's never been anything credible really about ball lightning. And when I was with the meteorology department at Purdue University back in the 1970s, we actually looked into it for a while and decided there was nothing there.
Well, then that settles it. If it's not ball lightning, then it's aliens.
Yeah.
So I'm glad we've had the proof.
Okay. And Anthony, this is a question that's not in the not from the general chat, but I do want to get you to address this, and that is, like, could you explain cloud seeding, like how it works and what it is, and explain why it's unusual or why it would not be something that would have affected the flooding severity in Texas?
All right. Well, first of all, cloud seeding has been around since the early 1800s. There used to be traveling cloud seeders that would go across the Midwest and promise farmers that they would make it rain. And they would, create these pots of concoctions that would boil and put vapors into the atmosphere. They would charge huge sums to the unsuspecting population of towns that were, having trouble with their crops. And they would basically say, I will do this and it will rain within 2 days. And then they'd move on to the next place and do the same scam. And so cloud seeding has a very long and sordid history before we get to the modern era of it. And then in the modern era, we use cloud condensation nuclei, basically the small crystals of silver iodide or salt. And that's what they did in Texas 2 days before the flooding. And there's been a lot of people saying, oh, well, it was cloud seeding that caused it, weather modification, geoengineering, all of that stuff. Well, none of that's true. Yes, there was cloud seeding, but cloud seeding has a very short-term effect, and it only causes an increased amount of precipitation in a storm that already exists. You can't just put cloud seeding into the air and expect it to instantly cause rain. It doesn't work like that. All it does is increase the yield, and the yield might increase 5 to 10%, but only over a short time, because the cloud precipitation nuclei, the CCN, precipitates out when it starts raining. And so there's no more left in the atmosphere. And so it doesn't linger for days and cause something to happen downstream a couple days later. It was entirely based on the whole remnants of the tropical storm and the other situations that occurred there. Cloud seeding had nothing to do with the Texas floods.
Yeah, and Brandon Dudley points out that the seeding was also done like 150 miles south of where the flooding happened. So unlikely,
Yeah.
even if it somehow lingered.
Yeah, weather
Um,
in Texas moves from north to south and from west to south. I've never seen weather in Texas, except in the case of a hurricane, move from south to north.
Awesome. Okay. Let's see. This is from Christine Laurel, who asks, if flash flooding was so common there, why weren't the warning systems working, or were they working?
They were working, and we had just covered that. The National Weather Service had issued their bulletins well in advance. The problem is the timing. The worst bulletin, flash flood warning, dangerous flooding will occur, happened in the wee hours of the morning when people were sleeping. And so maybe they didn't have NOAA weather radio there at the camp, which would, sound off in such a case. If they did and they heard it, maybe they ignored it because of warning fatigue that happens in the Midwest. They didn't have sirens there to warn them of this, even though they talked about putting this in 2016. The county commissioners for Kara County broached the idea, and there was so much complaints from people that were tired of too many weather warnings, voted it down. And so they didn't have sirens. So that's the only thing really that's going on here.
Awesome. Okay. We have... trying to find some more good ones about... Okay, let's do this one. This is kind of just like a general question, but with regards to the flooding, mainstream media people are awful. Couldn't they rein in the climate lies here in view of the fact that a lot of people have died? My answer to that would be no. They want to use this to double down and to try and scare people. It's the same thing they did with Asheville.
It's climate warning.
Waste.
Yep. All right. This is from our frequent viewer, Albert, who says, I saw a lefty study claiming that the Antarctica's seawater temperature is heating up because of the Arctic thermohaline circulation shutting down and because man-made climate change, of course. Thoughts?
No. That's all I have to say. No.
Yeah, so for our viewers who might not know what that is, I've heard of them talking about the Arctic thermohaline circulation. I haven't seen one talking about Antarctica. I think Antarctica at this point we're pretty well sure that it has more to do with volcanic activity, at least under the peninsula. But the thermohaline circulation, so there's several different circulations patterns that move water. One of the major ones is the fact that like high salt content is denser than lower salt content water, and so it sinks and it creates a mixing motion. And same happens with different temperatures of water in the water column, creates a mixing motion. And I guess the argument would be, and I've seen this argued about Arctic water, there is a freshwater influx due to melt, which would dilute seawater, both in terms of temperature and in terms of salt content, and change that circulation pattern. And there have been instances, I think, in the paleoclimate record that suggest that could cause, and Anthony, please interrupt me if I'm misunderstanding, that could cause some changes in at least Europe's weather. But
yeah, but it's just not happening. I mean, you look at the history of the mainstream media talking about this over the last 20 years. One year it's causing it to speed up. Another year it's causing it to slow down. They haven't been, and it's all model-based stuff, right? And so, yeah, there's been changes in temperature, but it's natural. I mean, stuff happens in the ocean that we don't understand or know about yet. We don't have a really good handle on this stuff. But, people that think they know better will put the stuff into climate models and then tweak some things around and say, oh, it's going to get worse. Disaster is on the horizon because the thermohaline circulation is going to shut down. We see stories about this all the time. And if you go to climaterealism.com, you can search for that and see all of these different times when we've debunked this, when it's getting worse, it's getting weaker, it's getting stronger, whatever it is. They seem to have kind of a flavor of the day related to this thermohaline circulation. The bottom line is there's no strong evidence either way, and there's been no case of collapse or anything that we know of in the paleo record or the modern record.
And if I could just add, something, generally speaking, if you understand something scientifically, you can predict the future. And if these guys were really doing science, they would make a hypothesis and see if it came true. But they never do that. This is always retrospective, analysis, making up what happened. And there's no way to verify it. If they really knew what they were talking about, they'd make a prediction, they'd see if it came true and take credit for it, but they don't.
Yeah, and a long time ago, it was claimed that Europe was going to freeze as a result of global warming because the Atlantic circulation would shut down, and all the warm air coming up from the equator would cease, and therefore Europe would freeze. Carl Wunsch, an expert on this at MIT about 25 years ago, said something like this: as long as the Earth turns and the wind blows, Europe will get the warmth from the tropics, and the circulation can't possibly cause the collapse of the circulation can't possibly cause Europe to freeze. So all these things they throw out this stuff, and then real scientists shoot it down. But the shooting down never gets as much publicity as the claims that they throw out. So we're always playing catch up with putting truth in. Correcting Bill Nye is a full-time job, and there aren't enough people on our side. Heartland and CO2 Coalition and a few others don't have enough resources to catch up and hit back on every one of these claims when they're made.
Oh, well, Myron, don't we have billions and billions of dollars from the oil industry to fight this stuff?
Yeah.
We've mislaid, we've lost the account numbers or something, we've lost access to our billions. I don't know.
It was all in Bitcoin and we lost our wallets.
Oh yeah. All right.
Yeah, I'm gonna in England somewhere.
I'm going to bring up this one last question for Steve and Myron here to close it out on. We have some good questions, but I need to go, so I'm going to hand Q&A over to Jim here. So Michelle asks, why wasn't 45Q tax credit not reduced more? Was it effectively reduced by not extending the construction date?
Myron? I think it's still in there, right? I mean,
yeah, I do not know the internal negotiations and who was, able to get and keep some of the credits that were not eliminated from the so-called Inflation Reduction Act. It's unfortunate that they didn't just say we're going to get rid of every single one right now. But instead, various members in the Republican Party were able to go and plead their case. And to get to the 50 votes that they needed, they gave up several of these. And the wind and solar extensions have gotten most of the attention on our side, and people have been saying, why, that's terrible. But the 45Q, why do they continue the nuclear subsidies? Why do they continue the geothermal? If these things are so great, people will build them. And so I don't know the internal negotiations, but it's the usual suspects in the Republican caucus in the Senate, and there were some in the House too. So,
yeah. All right. Yes. Linnea had to boogie. She had an appointment, so we'll take a few more questions here before we call it a day. Anthony Watts, Bob, the engineer guy, says, aren't we into hurricane season, and how's it going?
Yeah.
Well, we have officially started hurricane season as of June 1st. So far, we have not had any major hurricanes hitting the United States. We've had tropical storm systems, the one that spurred the flooding in Texas, for example. Tropical Storm Barry, I believe it was. So it's been a slow start. And so that's really all I have to say about it. And it's normal. Some years we get an early start to the hurricane season. We've seen hurricanes happen in April, and some years it doesn't start happening until late July or early August. So that's natural variation for you.
All right. We just have time for one more because even Steve Malloy has to go, and I'm sure Myron, we're testing his patience with this, but we do love taking Q&A from our audience. So I will actually let's take this one here. This is from JPS, from a viewer from Belgium. We do have an international audience, and that's so wonderful to see. He says, and since we know that CO2 follows temperature centuries later, could it be that the little rise in temperature could be a result from the warmer Middle Ages? Maybe this is a launching point to bring up one of the first facts about climate that Al Gore distorted, and it was the historic rise, the correlation between global temperature rise, and CO2 is the inverse of how he presented it, right, Steve?
You're muted.
Oh, you're muted, Steve. Oops.
Your
microphone's bad enough when it's on, so you should turn it on.
Sorry, I apologize. So, the ice core records show that temperatures precede CO2. I think there's something to that. I think we've seen it now. There have been questions about atmospheric CO2 and the effect it's having on boosting the carbon cycle. And it could be that as the planet has warmed over the past couple hundred years, the planet has gotten greener, and then we've added more CO2 that helps green the planet further, and that probably causes its own warming. I don't know. But, the important thing for this controversy is that no one can predict anything. If you can't predict anything, I'm sorry, I'm not going to communist because, you don't understand what you're talking about.
Yep. All right. Well, that is our outro music to slide into the end of the show and the end of this week and get you ready for your weekend. I want to thank Linnea, who is no longer here, and actually thank the chat for missing her already. It's nice comments. Everyone loves to see her on the show. I want to thank our streaming partners, Junk Science, CFACT, the CO2 Coalition, Climate Depot, What's Up With That, and Heartland UK Europe. Thank you to Ian, who's producing in the background for us. Thank you so much, Myron and Steve, for being with us today. You brought fantastic insight, not just on the one big, beautiful bill, but on so many other topics as well. Thank you, Anthony, for being with us this week. And thank you, our lovely audience, for joining us once again for the Climate Realism Show, live streaming every Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Bring friends to the next show, and we will see you next week. Bye-bye.